I had previously called this the worst matchup in the game, and I still think that it's definitely one of them, but me just saying that definitely put my name in that tiny little book there. Today, though, we've got a replay from Goblin Cleaver, I believe, if I'm getting this right. I'm really annoyed that the names don't show on replays anymore themselves. I have to go look at this other screen. But anyway, yeah, Dwarfs into Slaanesh. Very interesting. Let's take a look at the builds here, and then we'll talk about some things. Goblin Cleaver did say that his opponent quick-readied on him, so he kind of panic-picked a lot of this army, but actually thinking about it, things do make sense. Thorgrim, even though he doesn't have AP, has high stats and magic damage, both of which are going to be actually applicable against Slaanesh. He also has a pretty good suite of buffs and debuffs to help kind of control the attack and defense stats of his allies and his opponents here. High King also, if he gets below 50% base HP, gives immune to psychology to all units on the map, which seems quite strong, potentially against terror routes. Not that Dawi are particularly weak to it anyway. Stand your ground, of course, as well. Great Book of Grudges giving a constant +8 melee attack, and the Oath of Vengeance minus enemy melee defense can be super important for the dwarves. The rest of the army here, Iron Drakes also potentially going to be very important here, roasting out those low HP Slaanesh units. Got some Slayers here, Dwarf Warriors, a unit of Iron Breakers to help hold as an elite. Grumbling Guard as well for vigor refresh, a couple of miners with blasting charges. Taking a look at the Slaanesh side, we've already gone with an off-meta pick here. The Exalted Keeper of Secrets, Lore of Shadows. Definitely an interesting choice, but let's see how it goes there. Exalted Demonettes as well, Devoted Marauders. Got some Marauder Spears, some more Devoted Marauders. Very cost-effective, will generally trade well into a lot of things. Let's look at the reserve armies as well. For the Panic Pick Reserve, we've got one quite strong unit and just generally a decent pick, especially against a faction with limited flying tools. That is the Regiment of Renown, Gyro Bomber, the Sky Hammer, another ROR in the Gob Lobber. We've also got another Slayer, 4 Longbeards with great weapons, 3 regular Longbeards, and a Dwarf Warrior. For Slaanesh's reserves, got Bringers of Beguilement, 2 Devoted Marauders, 1 Devoted Marauder Spear, 2 Hell Scourges, 2 Demonettes, 1 Hell Strider, 1 Hell Strider with Hell Scourge, Seeker Chariot, and 1 unit of Fiends. Got one of those reserve units coming out, and that is, of course, the Gob Lobbers. Definitely a big mistake here by the Slaanesh player, I think, not having the Furies support that they need. Furies are going to be extremely critical in this matchup. Likewise, also the Slaanesh build does lack some of their best units, which is the armor-piercing cavalry. They are very squishy and micro-intensive, so sometimes for newer players or for players who are, let's say, less skilled and who are trying to abuse a faction that they perceive as very strong, they might not necessarily want to take a lot of those cavalry because ultimately they do require good micro to use effectively, but they are absolutely devastating. And kind of the final caveat here, I guess, is to contextualize this particular battle is the map. This is a map with a lot of chokes, a lot of situations where the dwarfs can prevent themselves largely from getting outflanked. So that will definitely come into play here as these Demonettes and other units look for allies to advance. But Slaanesh, of course, taking an early positional advantage. Not really surprising. Able to cap these 2 objectives relatively easily. Uncontested there. Got the Bringers of Beguilement. Can be insanely strong if they're kept alive, but are ultimately quite squishy. And the Iron Drakes, I think, are going to be pretty important on that front. Yeah. Both players just kind of sizing each other up for now, not necessarily wanting to commit to a big pitched engagement, and that's definitely going to work to the Dwarfs' favor. A little bit of friendly fire there, but some of the Devoted Marauders start to get burnt. Nothing too crazy on damage so far, but they are going to feel the fire and flames of the Dawi. Man, Iron Drakes are such a cool unit. Thorgrim also charging in. Again, the magic damage, I think he has high enough weapon and splash to just one-shot these Marauders anyway, but certainly... cost Mystifying Miasma? I'm not sure about that. Might be, yeah, a little bit of a misuse of that spell. I don't know, maybe he meant to use another spell there. But nice blasting charge volley as well, straight into those Exalted Demonettes. So it's an interesting one. Slayers are going to be countercharged by the Secret Chariots here. Nice little countercharge at the last second. Does mean that the Slayers will just tear them to shreds very quickly. These Slaanesh Chariots are light enough that they don't really have the mass to pull through. I don't know if this player has the DLC or not, but I would definitely say that the Chaos Chariots for Slaanesh, even though they're not armor-piercing, are just going to be better overall than the Secret Chariots, just because they have 110 armor Anyway, got a pitched battle here between Thorgrim and the Exalted Keeper of Secrets. Very cool. And, yeah, Thorgrim is going to do just fine in that fight. I mean, even with his stats, I mean, they're really high, right? He actually outclasses the Keeper of Secrets in terms of raw attack defense. Also has, like, maybe slightly less base HP, but generally an equivalent amount overall. And look at this, Bringers of Beguilement also just take huge damage here, get roasted out, and mostly killed. Slayers jumping in. They're also going to take significant damage here. That Penumbral Pendulum also coming in and clearing out some pretty good damage. Did this Slaanesh player accidentally take all of the spells? It's definitely happened to me before, so I can't judge too hard, but I think they actually did, which feels a little bit bad. Definitely quite a bit of wasted spend there. Could have brought at least 1 or 2 more Marauders. Maybe 1 more Marauder in the starting army, which I guess wouldn't have made that much of a difference. 1 Fury, though, definitely would have made a huge difference in helping to shut down those Iron Drakes. We've got some non-AP Hellstriders coming out here. Yeah, Dwarfs able to mostly surround and isolate the devoted Marauders down on this low ground, but in terms of objectives secured, Slaanesh still definitely in a commanding position. They also sent those devoted Marauders all the way around to the cliffside to try and get the Goblobber here. It looks like they are going to actually be able to make contact before being intercepted by those Longbeards, but the Dowie Air Force, just one tasteful Dowie Air Force, Skyhammer being deployed here, swooping in to help support. But yeah, these Hellstriders still struggling. We've got another Hellstrider coming out, trying to get on those Iron Drakes, and some Hellscourge Marauders also do get through and get on those Iron Drakes as well. Thankfully, though, Iron Drake's massive armor will help them hold out a little bit in this type of an engagement. They definitely don't want to just sit and take this damage for too long, but you can see the Skyhammer moving in. The Slayers also counterattack over, start to get some hits, drag down some of those Hellstriders. Oof. That one Demonette in particular, though, gets killed by the death blow. That was kind of cool. Oh, no, she's getting back up. She definitely got hit by the death blow, at the very least. Thorgrim also running around, just absolutely taking no prisoners. And then here comes the Skyhammer, dropping some bombs on the blob. Eventually, though, those Iron Drakes, I mean, the armor only lasts them so long when they have such a low model count. Thankfully, though, the Skyhammer's shock damage from the bombs, plus the shooting from the main gun, is enough to just break the leadership of these Slaanesh units, and they rout away, freeing up the Iron Drakes for some additional volleys. Goblobber has been shut down, but that kind of leaves these devoted Marauders in a little bit of a weird position where they're kind of in no man's land, not really able to do much. Blocked by Longbeards. I might just unsummon them, honestly, to get the refund on their points. Hard to say, but Slaanesh taking enough damage now that Dwarfs are going to be able to kind of start slow pushing the objectives. And this is, again, sort of a microcosm. I would say, no offense to either of these players, it does seem that like this is maybe 2 players who are relatively newer to the game. But just goes to show that, I mean, Slaanesh is, yes, they are incredibly strong, but they do require a decent amount of skill to play, I would say, just because their units are so squishy. They can be very unforgiving. And also, I mean, although this build may have been partly panic-picked, certainly the Iron Drakes are kind of an eye-opener for me, and even I learned something from these types of replays oftentimes, because, I mean, Iron Drakes, yes, they're going to be really hard to protect here, but especially if you take multiples, so that they can't just be easily shut down by 1 or 2 Furies, and just try and set them up in such a position, especially on maps with lots of chokes like this. I think it's definitely a doable matchup, even, you know, at different skill levels. Certainly, here, Thorgrim, just taking no prisoners once again, moving in. I actually really like the pick of Thorgrim here. He could definitely be vulnerable if he got surrounded by, like, Seekers or Heart Seekers, or even Demonettes, to be honest, but I think he'd do enough damage back to them that he could definitely hold his own, and certainly with infantry support here, he is going to do just fine. Those Iron Drakes, man, 124 kills, almost 3,000 damage value already. Very impressive performance from them. Now with the 2 cap there, and a 3 cap probably on the way, Dwarfs could pretty easily deploy a few units, push up onto this high ground and capture it. It's not like Slaanesh has a lot to directly threaten them, like these Hellstriders, or Hellscourges, and again, I don't know if the Slaanesh player knows this necessarily, but they literally have 0 armor piercing right now, which is, it seems like a bug or an oversight. Probably will get fixed in a future patch, but as it is right now, you definitely shouldn't ever take Hellscourges against the Dwarfs. So again, I'm not trying to badmouth this Slaanesh player, but it's not one of those things where if you just you know, quick, if you think that Slaanesh is a very strong faction, right? So you quick pick them and just immediately ready up to force your opponent into an uncomfortable situation. You probably get some wins on some people who are unprepared or who are just trying out multiplayer for their first time, but it's not going to work in those situations, and especially against a player who seems to know what they're doing on some level, certainly. Goblin Cleaver here having a grand old time, as are we, watching all these Slaanesh Marauders get roasted by flamethrowers. And especially on a map that seems to favor the Dawi somewhat, in that it has a lot of these choke points and ways to prevent Slaanesh from getting super effective flanking anyway. Maybe that was the thinking with going with more of an infantry-centric force for Slaanesh here, but probably if he quick-readied, he just had this army saved. And notice how the Dwarf player kind of just walling the different chokes here, which is just a great tactic with defensive faction like the Dwarfs on maps like this. You know, Cathay can do similar things. Any faction with like good armored defensive infantry, even Chaos, although they tend to be more aggressive, certainly you could set up in a defensive stance like this. Orgrim is being the aggressive one, though, while everyone else just kind of anvils up. He is going to strike out, sally forth, and just force the blob for the flamethrowers. Oh my goodness. Yes, my cats seem to enjoy it as well. Absolute madness. Fun replay. And, yeah, Slaanesh player, I believe, is going to throw in the towel relatively shortly. I mean, the Iron Drakes have just about used up all their ammunition, roasting out Slaanesh Marauders at this point. 216 kills, 3,500 damage value, and counting. So, yeah, lack of Furies definitely pretty critical here. And although Furies can't capture, I would say they're still a super important unit to have for shutting down specific range for any of the monogods in general. I mean, Furies are just generally quite strong at shutting down high-value ranged targets, but especially the Slaanesh Furies, specifically with Dwarfs, given their armor piercing, can deal with like Thunderers and Iron Drakes extremely efficiently, as long as they don't get blasted on the approach, which, again, kind of goes back to the Dwarfs' counter to that would be to maybe keep some Slayers on station. It's a little bit tricky to try and shoot them out of the sky just because the flamethrowers don't shoot into the air very well. You know, screening with something like Thunderer or Ranger might not be the most cost-efficient. It's hard to say, but certainly Furies would have benefited Slaanesh here. And it's interesting that even with the decisive value lead that the Dwarfs have, they're still, I mean, points-wise, they just secured this not necessarily just in time, but relatively close, you know, within a minute or so of when they would have need to have captured it in order to ensure that the 2-cap would actually win. Again, I think they probably could 3-cap if they really wanted to. Dwarfs got together a concerted push to run up there, but Demonettes kind of trying their best to prevent that. And I think that's pretty much it. So let's keep it close with Thorgrim and the Flamethrowers, which is, I think, the name of my new metal band. Not that I have a metal band, but yeah. Oh my god. Oh man, beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. And Skyhammer even got unsummoned and resummoned there. So good stuff from the Dwarfs. Love to see me a nice Dawi win over Slaanesh in Domination. Didn't think I would see too many of these, but that's why you play the games, right? And certainly against someone who's trying to cheese on quick battle. A little bit gratifying to see them just get burnt to a crisp as well. Oh, man. Thorgrim is a boss, and I love to see him also. Fairly unusual pick, but makes sense, actually, in this matchup. It actually does make sense. And, I mean, even on a more meta level, the Oath of Vengeance removing melee defense for Slaanesh units is actually quite strong, given that you can kind of hard snipe one of their elite units. Their melee defense generally is their only form of defense. If you think about like Exalted Demonettes, you take them down to in the teens or 0 melee defense, they're just gonna get wilted even by like Dwarf Warriors and stuff, right? So anyway, interesting, fun one. Yeah, the Ironbreakers end up also holding out 144 kills. Didn't really highlight them too much. They were just grinding it out old school like the Dawi of old. Slayers also do a great job, just generally a great unit overall. And 4,598 damage value, 40,000 total damage dealt. I mean, you guys take Furies, please. But even then, might still have been able to get a good performance in. They had been properly protected from said Furies. A lot of this infantry in the initial starting army just gets absolutely roasted, and it's not much better if we look at the reinforcements. So there you go. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching this one. If you do like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.